the session. And then after the session, I mean, in a day or two, we will send out the recording. And then I think Dave, my marketing manager, will also send out, he likes to send out discount vouchers, etc. if people want to ever purchase product or utilize it for on site. Okay, so actually, this is the first time I've done a session like this, and I've got a number of requests over the past month to do a bit more of a swimming focus session. Because generally I'm doing a lot of chats to runners and cyclists and triathletes. And I think swimming does come with its own challenges. I've worked with a number of open swimmers over many, many years. The focus here isn't necessarily open water swimming. I'm definitely going to put focus also, the focus is going to be on pool swimming, and we'll talk about open water swimming if there are questions, but the focus is really going to be also around pool training, because I think that's really the bulk of most people's training. And I actually come from a multi-sport background as well. I've been swimming since the age of 4. I'm a runner, cyclist, swimmer, triathlete. I've been in the endurance sport for, I think it's about 28 years now. And so I do understand the challenges of sports nutrition and nutrition around the training. So just a little introduction for those people that don't know me. My name is Mark Wolff. I'm one of the co-founders of 32GI. I'm an exercise physiology specialist. I actually have a big focus on preventative health. I've got a background in blood chemistry, so I work a lot with athletes in trying to maintain and optimize health when it comes to training, because very often athletes suppress their immune systems. And then I've got a background in clinical nutrition, very strong in nutrition and sports nutrition. And these are all puzzle pieces that fit together to make sure that an athlete has got the best ability to perform, but the focus is always on the platform of health in order to empower performance. And that's usually my focus. I always want to see people live long, healthy lives, and that's really what I'm about. Oh, sorry, the screen is blank there, somebody said. Let me try reshare the screen. I apologize for that. I'm going to reshare it. Okay, can you see the screen? Just let me know in the chat. Can you see the screen? It says how to approach your race fueling. Great. Okay. Sorry about that. Technology. It's not always my friend. Okay, so what I'm going to do tonight is the session is going to be quite an informative and educational session. I'm going to start with just teaching you a little bit about the human body and how the energy system works. I'm going to talk about how you fuel different levels of intensity, and then we're going to break it down into a little bit more practical from a fueling perspective, how to understand how much carbohydrates you should be consuming, where protein fits in. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about like swimming session, swimming specific nutrition, like how to approach that. And then also gala events, I'm going to talk about that as well. I'm assuming some of the parents on here might have children that swim, and I know how difficult that can also be. And then I'll also talk a bit about recovery as well, because I think that's also a very vital aspect. So it's a bit of a different session than I do for other athletes. And I've tried to, I don't want it to be too long, but I want to make sure that I give you enough value and enough information that you go away saying, well, okay, there's a bit of a light bulb moment for me, and I've learned something tonight. If there are any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I will address them as we're going along. I do glance at the chat occasionally, so if there's something comes to mind and you want to ask a question, ask away. If I don't feel that I'm going to address it, then I'll definitely answer it. If I am going to address it, then I'll let you know. Okay, so let's get started. The title is a bit inaccurate because it's really how to approach your training and race fueling, and also a little bit of daily eating as well. We'll get to that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about human physiology, and we'll start with the human fuel tanks because this is actually quite important. So a lot of people don't understand how the energy system works, and I'm going to explain it to you in simple terms, and this will give you a better idea of how the aspect of fueling or sports nutrition fits into place. Okay, so The human body has two primary fuel tanks. Okay, you've got a glycogen fuel tank. These are your carbohydrate stores. Glycogen is primarily stored in the muscles, and a percentage of glycogen is also stored in the liver. And this is the tank that I call your rocket fuel. When you're performing at a very high level of intensity, this is the tank that's going to be utilized the most. When it comes to the fat fuel tank, which is the other primary fuel tank, there you're talking about 40,000 calories of energy reserve, roughly. You could run 50 marathons just on that alone. You could do an extremely long, low intensity open water swim if you wanted. You can really go for hours and hours on your fat fuel tank, assuming you're performing at the right level of intensity, and that's very important. Okay, so glycogen is very limited. You can see 2,000 calories, and that's your rocket fuel. So it burns up quite quickly, and once it's burnt up, that's gone. Fat takes a lot longer to burn up, and you basically got an unlimited supply. So both fuel tanks play a very vital role. And how do you determine when these are utilized? Will ultimately determine on the energy system that you're tapping into. So this infographic is quite a nice explanation. You get your ATP-CP system, which is creatine phosphatase. That's on the far left-hand side. That is the energy system that engages for very short, like 6 to 10 second max out effort. So like that's really a max effort. So it could be a 1-rep squat. It could be a 25-meter sprint in a pool. It is like max effort, all out effort. Okay. Then we're talking about anaerobic glycolysis. So this is when you're hitting your anaerobic zones. These are your upper zones, and there your glycogen stores are primarily being utilized. And then we get something called aerobic glycolysis. This is like middle of the range zones, but also carbohydrate burning. In actual fact, I'll show you, but this is your zone 3. And anaerobic glycolysis and ATP, CP would be more like your zone 5, zone 4 areas from a heart rate perspective. And then if you're talking about endurance, which is very long distance, which doesn't really always fall into the swimmer side of things, unless you're doing really long distance swimming, like a 10K open water swim or crossing the English Channel. But there we're talking about aerobic glycolysis, and there basically predominantly fat is the main source of fuel, and that goes for many hours. So that's how the energy system actually looks like in the human body. Okay. How do you determine the intensity that you're performing at? The true measure is a percentage of heart rate. So if you want to understand actual effort, some people use power, some people use pace. A lot of people understand that if they're swimming 90-second, 100 meters, for them that could be very easy. And then once they're hitting 75 or 70 seconds, that's very, very hard. And then, as it goes a lot quicker, so that those are your upper zones. But pace is not always a very accurate measure of the actual effort that you're performing. The actual effort you're performing at is a percentage of your heart rate. And that determines ultimately the tanks that you will be utilizing as a source of fuel. So if you're looking at zone 1, if you look at that yellow tank I've drawn there, yellow is fat, white is glycogen. You'll notice that it's predominantly fat. Zone 1 is nearly a pure fat burn zone. You're hardly chewing up any carbohydrate stores, and that's about 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. Zone 2 is also primarily a fat burn zone, and that would be about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. And then we'd move into zone 3. This is what we call no man's land. Here you basically burning off a large amount of carbs, but you're also burning off fat. So you're neither here nor there. You're not actually performing very much aerobic. You're also not really in the anaerobic zone. This is a zone you'd preferably not like to train in too much. Most training should be done in the zone 1 or 2. From a recovery or aerobic perspective, improving aerobic conditioning, because that's your foundation of exercise. And then when you're putting the hammer down or the gas down, you're doing like 20s, 50s, 100s, maybe even 400s, you're really moving up into zone 4 or 5. And those are where you're putting in much bigger efforts. We can talk about polarized training. It's like a U shape, sort of like this. Can't flatten my hands, but basically it will look more like that. Zone 4 and 5 is about 15 to 20% of your total training load. And then zone 2 or zone 1, your aerobic should be probably so about 75 to 80% of your training. Obviously, you'll fit a little bit into zone 3, but that's more your polarized training. And that's really how most athletes train, depending on different kinds of efforts. Obviously, there's different zones that are utilized, but the biggest benefits would be aerobic zone 2 and then your upper zones 4 and 5. That's where you get the best performance results. Okay. So based on this, I mean, it basically means that the intensity that you're going to be performing at will determine ultimately the kind of fueling that you would need to support that particular level of exercise intensity. So if you know you're just going to do a recovery swim and you're going to go out and do, I don't know, 1500 or 2Ks in a swimming pool, and you're just going to do very, very easy, loosen up the muscles, aerobic, do you need to fuel a session like that? Yeah, probably not. You can probably just hydrate and you can go quite comfortably. But the minute you start with intervals and you start with power work and pace work, if you want to improve your ability to perform, then fueling is absolutely a necessity. You're tapping into your glycogen stores, which are your carbohydrate stores. You want to try and maximize and spare as much as possible. And carbohydrates do equal better performance numbers. Okay, so in short, high intensity sessions deplete glycogen at a more rapid rate. In order to slow this down and preserve as much glycogen as possible, carbohydrates need to be consumed during exercise. I know there's a lot of kids who do sometimes 3-hour swim sessions. Sometimes these sessions are also very intense, and they're long swimming sessions, even in a span of 90 minutes, and there's a lot of intensity in there. So it's very important to understand that if you are performing at a very high level, you need to be able to fuel that level of effort. Lower to medium intensity sessions, you're burning a high rate of fat to glycogen, so you can take advantage of your primary fuel source, which is actually fat, and those would be lesser fuel sessions. So we call this like carbohydrate periodization, utilizing the right amount of carbs for the session goal that you're trying to achieve. Okay. In short, I just drew this infographic. If you look at the aerobic side, you'll see that there's a fat tank and a glycogen tank. Aerobic requires low carb intake, and as you move through the zones up towards more the anaerobic zones, the glycogen tank becomes more primary fuel source, and you'll need a higher carb intake to support those level of efforts. Okay, does that make sense? If there's any questions, just feel free to ask. So when it comes to fueling, if I look at how long you're going to swim for or whatever exercise session you're going to be doing, you can actually look at zone 1 and zone 2, and you can actually see if you're going to swim for or exercise for less than 2 hours. You can go pretty much in water in any of those zones, but you would need to focus very much on the recovery afterwards. If you're going to go greater than 2 hours, then you definitely would want to look at fueling. Now, there's also something called cardiac drift. Even though you're in a swimming pool, which can be cool, over a period of time, due to insulation and obviously due to muscular movement, your heart rate can also start to elevate naturally over a period of time. We call this cardiac drift. I don't know where that came from. But basically the idea is that you might think you're doing an aerobic session, and unfortunately, you're not really doing an aerobic session, because during that effort, your heart rate is moving into the upper zone. So you actually might need to take on some fuel. So you'll see there, once you move into zone 3, 4, and 5, you can actually see, even if you're swimming or exercising less than 2 hours, you're talking about water or low carb. And if you're going as far as greater than 2 hours go, then you definitely go with a higher carb as you're moving into those upper zones. And when you get to zone 4 and 5, even less than 2 hours, you'd have to take in carbohydrates. Greater than 2 hours, definitely carbs. Zone 5, you're not going to go and swim in that, do those efforts for very long periods of time. Those are more your second to very low minute efforts, and those will require carbohydrate fueling. Absolutely. Okay. I don't know why this came on here. I'm just trying to see if I can delete it. Annotation. There we go. Okay. Right. So I think the idea when it comes to any kind of sports performance, you need to fuel for effort. Carbohydrates equal better performance. They also equal better recovery. So that's something that's very important to mention around sports nutrition. You you don't only fuel for effort. You've got to also decide, when am I training next? Am I swimming in the morning? Am I swimming in the evening? Am I doing strength work in the morning? Am I swimming in the evening? Am I doing a swim strength and a swim the next day? And very often you would actually fuel during a session to also enable the recovery post exercise. You might be limited to when you're having dinner or when you're going to be having breakfast. And if you're a child and you are going to school, then it's even more difficult, because how are you going to fit those snacks in between and make sure that you've recovered from session to session and still being able to eat a sufficient amount of food to be able to even focus in a classroom environment? And it's a very difficult challenge that a lot of parents actually have. You know, as adults, we don't really have those challenges much. We've got a little bit more control because, yeah, sure, we could be stuck in an office, but we still got a little bit more control as to, the kind of foods and what we can take on, etc. I'll help a little bit and give some ideas around it. Okay. I get asked a lot about fasted training. And fasted training does have advantages because it does allow you to adapt to high rates of fat oxidation during exercise. So if you are doing fasted training, it means that you're burning off more fat. So for some people that want to lean out, let's say they're just a little bit bulky and they want to lean out and increase lean muscle and drop body fat, fasted training can have a benefit, but those would only be performed under light to moderate intensity sessions or short to medium duration sessions. Longer sessions only if you're keeping within those low heart rate zones. When it comes to some of the best athletes in the world, they're efficient at consuming carbohydrates, so they know how to carb up. Their stomachs adapt to it. They're very good at it. They're used to consuming a high amount of carbohydrates and food through the day to support their energy systems and to make sure they're getting in enough calories to not be in too much of a calorie deficit, because they can also impact performance. It can lead to injury. It can lead to illness. It can also lead to the onset of fatigue. And then they're also very good at oxidizing a high rate of fat during exercise, because they do fixed sessions where they would do faster training sessions, etc. And so we call this carbohydrate periodization. And I mentioned that earlier, is where you've got a very, very efficient ability at utilizing carbohydrates as an energy source, but you've also got a very efficient ability to utilize fat as an energy source. And those are the two languages that the body can speak very well. But if somebody ate, for example, a very low carb, high fat diet, and then suddenly introduced carbs and swimming, it could upset the stomach. It cause gastrointestinal distress. And in a swimming pool, even more so, because you're buoyant. So it does play havoc with the digestive system occasionally. I know that, for example, if I'm swimming and I've eaten incorrect foods, sometimes I get a bit of bloatedness and discomfort in the stomach, and it's not a pleasant feeling. So these kinds of things need to be looked at. Is it the kind of food you're eating prior to exercise? Is it something that you're consuming that's just not that you're not tolerant to, for example? And maybe that just needs to be modified. But also at the same time, you need to understand that your body could be speaking a fat language, and now you're introducing carbohydrates, or you eat a high carbohydrate diet and now you want to do faster training and you wonder, are you fatiguing? It works both ways. So a lot of athletes, they train their systems to adapt to both and let the body speak both languages. Okay. This is just something that's very interesting, and I'll bring this up. A lot of people ask me about the overall impact and performance of carbohydrates versus low carb or high fat diets. And I love to stress this, but the science doesn't lie. And I started in chronological order. 1983, there was a 4-week study by Finney. We saw there was no difference in endurance capacity at low to moderate intensity, at 60 to 64% of VO max, and 5 subjects on a ketogenic diet versus a mixed diet. So what they discovered there was no difference. But what is the problem with the study? It's only 62 to 64% of VO2 max. So yes, with low intensity training, you're not really going to see much of a difference. But the rest of the studies, if I look at Helgen 96, smaller training adaptations after 7 weeks with a high fat versus a high carbohydrate diet. So what actually happened was those that were consuming carbohydrates were adapting at a much higher rate. If you take two athletes that are very similar in fitness and strength and power, and you feed the one carbohydrates and the other one you're feeding a high fat or low carb diet, the athlete that's taking the carbohydrates over a period of time is going to be performing at a much greater level. So it absolutely does help improve performance. Training adaptation is so important. Whenever we're doing a form of exercise and we're breaking our bodies down, we need to allow for recovery, adaptation, and building up. And carbohydrates, they actually lower the stress on the body by fueling yourself during an exercise session, and they also help with the recovery phase. So from session to session and day to day, one athlete will adapt a lot quicker than another. Fleming in 2003, they found decrements in peak power output and endurance performance in high-fat diet groups. So basically, they found these athletes had power numbers were going down, and that's very important. Any form of exercise, any sporting discipline, does require power. Whether you're a tennis player, a swimmer, a cyclist, a runner, power is a very big, important measurement. And then in 2014, they injected a ketogenic diet or a mixed diet for 4 weeks. Mixed diet being a high carbohydrate diet, but a mixed diet of carbs, fat, and protein. And this was in off-road cyclists. But again, they found reductions in peak power were observed after the ketogenic diet. So the carbohydrate diet, they didn't have reductions in peak power, but those that went on a higher fat diet and cut the carbs out, they had drops in power. The reason I actually bring the studies up is because, and there's quite a lot more, there's dozens of studies, is because a lot of people seem to think that carbohydrates are like the big evil, but for athletes, they're absolutely not. We are 0.1% of the world population. It actually does a hectic amount of sport and exercise. And we definitely need, if you want to be a Ferrari or you want to be a Lamborghini, a high-performance sports car, you need to put high-performance fuel in your engine. And the only high-performance fuel is carbohydrates, quickest, most easily accessible form of fuel and energy supply to the human body. And it's very important to note that from a performance perspective, they will make a huge difference. Okay. Right. When it comes to practical fueling strategies, and this is where we're going to start to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, a lot of people ask me, well, okay, I need to take in carbohydrates, but how much carbohydrates should I take during an exercise session? We'll talk about how during a swimming session you can take it, but we look at a measurement on an hourly basis that's going to support the level of sports performance. And generally, sports nutrition guidelines, legacy guidelines, were advocating 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per an hour. This chart was actually taken from a sports scientist, Asker Jurkendrup, who's very well respected in the world of sports science, but very well respected in the world of sports nutrition as well. And Asker actually said that based on the period of, or the length of time you're going to be training, that's how he would ultimately determine the amount of carbohydrates you should be consuming per an hour. I would advocate that 60 grams is much more middle of the road and quite supportive, 60 grams per an hour. If you think about it, 60 grams of carbs, if you look at a gram of carb being 4 calories, it's 240 calories. An hour of swimming, I mean, how much you're going to burn off an hour of swimming? You're going to burn way more, especially if you do intensity work. You'll burn more than 240 calories in that 60 minutes. So there's no ways that you could worry about ever gaining weight or anything like that during a sporting exercise session. But the one thing that can be guaranteed is that the amount of carbohydrates that you consume, if it's split over that session, is ultimately going to translate to better performance in that session and also better recovery post-exercise. I don't think that, if you look at the volume of carbohydrates you should be taking in, you've got to not just think about it from a sports performance perspective, but you've also got to look at the aspect of gastrointestinal comfort. Now, swimming, you can get digestive discomfort, and so it's important that the volume of carbohydrates you take is not going to cause any gastrointestinal distress or GI distress, as we call it, because that's the last thing you want. You need to feel comfortable when you're swimming, but at the same time, you also need to feel energetic, and you need to consume something to be able to support that level of effort. If I have a look at what's written in this chart here, you'll see that less than 60 grams, you can use single or multiple transportable carbohydrates. So what is a single carbohydrate. A single source carbohydrate is something like, okay, so carbohydrates are broken down into three fractions. You get what's called monosaccharides, then you get disaccharides, and you get polysaccharides. A monosaccharide is a single molecule, so that can be glucose or fructose. Those are single transportable carbohydrates. It's a single source. So glucose and fructose, and then you can also get lactose and galactose. Those are milk sugar. Okay. If we move to a multiple transporter carbohydrate, that could be a disaccharide or a polysaccharide. So disaccharide is two molecules bound together. An example of that is table sugar. So sugar, for example, is a fructose molecule and a glucose molecule, and they're bound together in a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, so that is a multiple transportable carbohydrate. Why? There's two channels in the body. The one channel that's utilized to supply energy is called the fructose channel, and that's limited to 30 grams per hour. So if you're only consuming fructose, your body cannot handle more than 30 grams per hour. So if you were utilizing a high fructose source, could even be kind of a fruit, and you were taking in 60 grams per hour, and 40 grams of that was fructose and 20 grams was glucose, you would probably battle with gastrointestinal distress because your fructose channel has been maxed out and actually a little bit too much. And that does require a fermentation process to break it down and to convert it into ultimately glucose and then adenosine triphosphate, which is used to fire the muscles. So multiple transporter carbohydrates are usually the safest way to go because they will take the glucose and the fructose channel, and the glucose channel has got a throughput of around 60 grams per an hour of carbohydrate. So if you're having pure glucose, you could take 60, and then there's the famous study where they took a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio, so 60 plus 30, to get to 90 grams of carbs per hour. And they found that that did provide a level of digestive comfort and enabled you to take in a very high amount of carbohydrates during that session. But again, each individual, it's unique to them what they can take in based on their daily dietary requirements, what they're used to eating, how they're eating, the kind of mixed diet they're taking or non-mixed diet that they're on. Because you can't go from like 0 to hero, from eating no carbs to just suddenly fueling with carbohydrates. The body won't adapt. And so I developed a method many years ago, which is called the tipping point method. Okay, so how does this work? You're not sure because you've never really measured or monitored your fueling during the session. Somebody actually said to me, how do you know, like, I mean, some people just take a drink and they put it on the side of the pool and they drink it, but they never know exactly how much they're consuming through their training session. And if the training session is an hour and a half or 2 hours, how much grams of carbs are they taking per 30 minutes or per 60 minutes during that session? What you consume has to be measurable to support the level of performance. Okay. If you've never done this before, you always start off on the low end. That's the tipping point method. And you build up very slowly. So you pick key sessions, could be intensity sessions, or could be longer sessions like endurance sessions. And you would fuel, and you would start off with a small amount. So let's say you did start off with 30 grams of carbs per hour, and you had no gastrointestinal discomfort. And then the next swimming session you decided, okay, I'm going to try 40 grams per hour, and it worked very well for you. And then you decided, okay, let's push it up a little bit more. You went to 50, it worked well. And then eventually you go to 60 and you're like, okay, now I'm battling. My stomach's not very comfortable with 60 grams per hour. I went on a 90-minute swim and I had 90 grams in total through that session, and I really battled. So in that case, then you would have to go back to where you were last comfortable. You would keep on consuming that carbohydrate in sessions over maybe another 2 or 3 weeks until your gut adapted. So there's training the muscles, but there's also training the gut. And it's very important to train the gut to be receptive and to develop towards carbohydrate absorption. Then after a couple of weeks, you try and push back to 60 and thumbs up, it worked. 60 now, you didn't feel discomfort, you felt more energetic and you felt great. And then you push to maybe 65 or 70. You can do this incrementally. And then let's say 65 worked and you push to 70, and now at 70, you battled again. So you drop back to your previous one. You go back to 65, you keep going for a few weeks, you train the gut, and then you try push back to 70. 70 still didn't work. So the question now is 70 your limit? Could be. But also you need to look at the carbohydrate sources. So in other words, what is the blend of carbohydrates that you're utilizing as a source of energy during that exercise session? If the blend is a higher fructose and to sort of glucose ratio, I'm not saying it could be like a 0.7 fructose to 1 glucose, or a 1-to-1, or somewhere along those lines. You might want to try and drop the fructose down and increase the glucose and see if a different blend of carbohydrates. Sometimes you get with polysaccharides, we put dextrins in. A dextrin is a polysaccharide, is a dextrin. It's got a large amount of molecules that actually break down. It's also quite easy on the stomach. Some carbohydrate mixes have got 3 or 4 different carbohydrates in that stage release and are much more easy on the stomach. So sometimes it's the actual product you're utilizing as opposed to you've hit your tipping point. And you keep working at this to try and improve it over time. I truly believe that if you can take in the maximum amount of carbohydrates in a session without triggering gastrointestinal stress, you've nailed your sports nutrition. And that would be pegged in a moment in time. And that is actually what we call the tipping point build. That's your tipping point, or that's your cutoff, and that's where you feel the most comfortable and also the most energetic. And that takes time to build it. So it's not something that's just going to work immediately. It's something that needs to be trained over time and worked with and experimented with until you get it right. And then once you get it right, you can still tweak. I mean, I had a cutoff of 74, 75 grams of carbs per an hour for a very long time. And by switching a product and retraining my gut and spending about 10 months doing that, I managed to increase my carbohydrate intake to 115 grams per hour without causing any gastrointestinal distress. And I felt comfortable and I felt great. The only problem was when I took in that amount of carbohydrates, I felt I had so much energy, I had to actually work harder to get rid of it. So there was the downside. But it was really me just doing some testing. Okay, so that's called the tipping point method, and I think it's quite a nice way of building up. Okay, let's take a look at swimming considerations. Are there any questions on that? Okay. So if we're looking at swimming, I mean, okay, I've spoken about the energy systems. I mean, the bulk of your training will be aerobic, and then you've got glycolytic and anaerobic. And if I translate that into what you would do from an energy system perspective, you've got warm up, recover, cool down, easy pace. Yellow would be more your tempo. We call that like it's close to threshold training. I'd say that's plus minus maybe 1,000 meters or higher kind of efforts if you're really putting in a pace. And then you've got anaerobic. You've got threshold anaerobic, and that's more 25 meter, 50 meter, 100 meter, 200 meter. Those are really max or hard efforts that you're putting out, and there you're really performing at a very high intensity. So obviously the bulk of your training will be, looking like this over time. Okay. I put a swim set example here. Don't kill me for it. It's just a very basic swim set. I don't get really complicated, but I just wanted to give you an idea as to sort of how you'd look at a swim set, and then how you would start incorporating fueling. So I just put a 600 meter warm up, 60-second recover. I put green because it's aerobic. You don't do your warm ups fast. You do them very slowly and casually. I did a bit of a build in pace, so maybe 70 minutes easy, 25 meter push for 400 meters. Then some drills, just a couple of drills I threw in there. Then I thought, okay, let's push to zone 3. So a bit of pedal work. That's a bit more threshold training. So maybe 5 by 200s. You're still building, so nothing hectic. And then maybe a main set, 2 by 50s on 45, 1 by 100s on 130. I mean, some people can swim way faster than that. For them, it might be intense. I mean, for me, maybe it is very intense. And then a bit of a 600 meter warm down. Okay. So that's just I just put a basic swim set together. How do you feel for a swim set like that? And this is how I look at it. How long before the session do you actually have to eat? I think that's very important, because if you're going to train at 6 o'clock in the morning, or you're going to wake up at 4:30 or 5, will you have time to pre-fuel before the session? If you are a female athlete, do not train fasted. Never train fasted. Why? Female athletes have elevated cortisol upon waking, higher than men. And the only way to suppress your cortisol is to consume carbohydrates and to lower it. Fasted training for women actually does lead to hormonal imbalance, and it really does upset the balance over time. You will do way better by having a pre-training meal. It doesn't mean you have to eat a big bowl of porridge or anything like that. It could be a simple shake. It could be eating a banana. My wife, for example, we've got something called pre-race meals. She mixes it with a bit of protein every day, a bit of milk, and she mixes in a bowl and she eats it off a spoon, but you could even make it into a shake and drink it. But it's always best, or you could just be taking a gel or some carbohydrate mix before, but it's really important to do pre-session training meal, especially if you're a female. If you're a male and you've got the time, I would still advise it. If you are going to be doing a quality session, it will benefit you. And if not, then you need to look at how you're going to be feeling during the session. Okay. How long you have before the session will ultimately determine how much you can consume, because obviously it needs to break down. It needs to be, your body needs to be receptive to it. You don't want to be getting into the pool and your stomach's full and you're going to feel uncomfortable. That will feel terrible. If you're obviously doing a very light or easy aerobic session, then a pre-session feeling would be very, very small to, if you're male, I would say nothing. Okay, so warm up 600 meter, you stop 60 seconds, consume from the fuel bottle. Could be a fuel bottle, could be gel, could be something. Most of the time, it's probably easier to have a bottle with an isotonic solution, or sometimes I've got a hydration solution, and then I've got a product which is called exogenous carbohydrate source, so something that is an external carbohydrate source next to that. And if I take a gel, then maybe I have a sip on water. Move to the next set, you'll see 60-second recovery, fuel in between. Move to the next set, 60-second recovery, fuel in between. And you can see how the fueling consistently goes in between that set. And let's say that set does take 60 minutes. Then I would look at how many options I've got for fueling. And I would divide it up into, let's say I'm taking 60 grams of carbs. I would make sure that that bottle has got the right amount of measurement, so that if I had 6 sips from that bottle, I usually mark the bottle and I know that I've taken 10 grams, 10 grams, 10 grams, 10 grams, 10 grams, or 15 grams, whatever it is, to get to my 60 grams for the hour. And then after the session, fuel, or I focus on post-session recovery, and that's quite important. Okay, does that make sense to you? All right. Even if it's a 15 or 20-second stop and you've got a chance to take in something because the next set's going to be longer, I would suggest in doing it. All right. Let's have a look now. I mean, that's just a training session, but let's have a look at gala nutrition, because that's also very difficult sometimes. So again, should you be eating before? How long before your first heat do you have to eat? I think it's very important. The further you are away from your swimming session or your heat, the more you can eat. 2 to 2.5 hours before the start of something is quite important to consume a meal. And I'd say that should be between, depending on a person's body weight, could be anywhere between 300 to 500 calories. If it's 3 hours before, 4 hours before, you can even go 600, 700 calories, because you've got more time to allow it to digest. Don't skip those pre-race or pre-gala meals. I think it's very important. And then as you get closer to the heat or the event, you can still top up 10, 15 minutes before with a form of carbohydrate that's going to support you for that particular heat. Okay. Straight after the heat, there's no messing around. You recover immediately. You've worked very hard. Maybe you've still got 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, maybe you've got a medley or a team event still. Whatever it is, you've got to recover immediately afterwards. And I just put there's an hour between the next heat, just as an example. I mean, it could be 90 minutes, 2 hours, but I'll just use an hour. You'll see that I've put nothing in between, but then before the next heat, I've allowed for fueling, and that could be 20, 30 minutes before, or even 15 minutes before. Allow it to settle, get the carbohydrate into the glucose, and fire away with heat 2. Come out immediately, recover. Now there's a much longer period. So an hour, eat something. Could be a tuna sandwich, could be a sandwich, could be something that is a carbohydrate or protein mix. You've got 2 hours still, nothing. You've got to eat. Keep eating. You've got to keep topping up. Your energy system's like a roller coaster. It's going to go up and down. If you mistime your nutrition, by the time you get to heat 3, your energy levels could be so depleted and low that your ability to perform in that heat will be very difficult to do so. So it's very important to keep yourself topped up in between. If you think about a day, and sometimes these guys can go 4 or 5 hours, there's no ways in the period of 4 or 5 hours during a day that I wouldn't eat during that period. And yeah, you're doing exercise on top of that, so your calorie consumption will actually be a lot higher because these are intervals, and you're burning off a large amount of calories by doing these sort of hit or interval sessions in between the day. Okay, and then I've got fuel heat 3, and then you've only got 10 minutes to next heat maybe, so you've got to recover and then go straight into heat 4. So what you consume, etc., is quite important to be able to support those level of efforts. And a lot of people eat the wrong foods, and I don't think chocolates and bar ones and those kind of things and Cokes are always the best thing. I think that consuming what you need to recover from a protein carbohydrate perspective and then taking in the right carbohydrates for the next session in a measured amount would actually determine what would be best for you. Now, I'll talk a little bit about some supplements that are also great aids for improving performance as well. Okay, are there any questions on that? Anyone want to talk a little bit or ask any questions on that? Okay. I think the big thing when it comes to sports nutrition is that you get, people asking a lot of times is, what should I be consuming? Should I have a liquid fuel? Is it better, or a solid fuel? And I think it really depends on the individual. I find that sometimes it's difficult to eat because I don't want it to sit, and it does take a little bit longer to digest. And I find sometimes that a liquid fuel is a little bit better. When it's low intensity sessions, maybe it's easier for me to eat, but with high intensity sessions, I like to just get it down and get it absorbed as quickly as possible. But it also, from a preference point of view, I think it's very important that taste, texture, and convenience definitely play a role in deciding what you should take. Will liquid or solid fuel provide more energy than the next? No. I mean, they both break down, they both get converted into energy. It's more like taste, texture, and convenience that you need to look at. Okay, let's talk a bit about hydration because it's quite important. So we've spoken on the energy side of things. When it comes to hydration, you really do need to take it into account. A lot of people think that you don't sweat in a pool, but you do sweat in a pool. I mean, you absolutely do lose fluid. And hydration is quite important. So I find with a lot of athletes, when they do very long swim sets, they feel very like flat or fatigued afterwards. Often it's not just the energy deficiency. Sometimes they also haven't consumed enough fluid during their training session. And it's very important to stay hydrated. Drinking water on its own, by the way, has got a much lower absorption rate than drinking water in a isotonic or a hypertonic solution. Those fluids get pulled through a lot quicker, and those are fluids that have got minerals in and carbohydrates, and they're much better for fluid absorption. Okay, water on its own has got a very, if you think about the stomach, it's more like a drain, like a blocked drain. You drink water, it sits, and then it drops, and then it drops. But if you add some carbohydrates and you add some sodium to it, it drops a lot quicker. It's like a bit of a, like a, to unblock a drain, for example. The water goes down quicker. Okay. Generally, hydration is calculated on temperature, conditions, the individual needs. I mean, obviously, when it comes to pool temperature, it can make a massive difference. Swimming in a pool that's got a cold temperature, your sweat rate will be a lot lower. I found that swimming in a pool that's got a high temperature, I once went to a pool at one of the Virgin Active gyms, I think it was Eastgate. Man, I felt like I was melting. It was so fatiguing. It was just so hot, and definitely the body is losing a lot more fluid, and it was very, very difficult. And obviously the heart rate's up because your full body temperature is not down. So that makes it a little bit harder. And so sometimes the temperature can play quite a vital role. So just remember, nutrition will be based on intensity and the amount required per hour as well as duration. But you also need to take into account how much fluid you need to take in. Right. How do you determine how much fluid you should be taking? Very simple. Weigh yourself before your training session. Weigh yourself after your training session. So if you weighed 65 kilos before your training session, and after your training session you weighed 64 kilos, you lost a liter of fluid, which is 1 liter fluid. The rule of hydration is to replenish around 80% of fluid loss, which meant during that session you should have taken in 800 ml. If it was 2 hours, maybe 400 mils an hour and a half, obviously, it would be about 450 mils or per per an hour to try and get it up to that. So that's quite important. If though you weighed yourself before you're 65 and after you're 64, and you drank a 600 ml bottle in between, your actual weight loss is not 1 liter, it's 1.6 liters. Because you've got to add back the fluid that you consume. It does add to the weight loss. So in that case, then if you're looking at 80%, then it's a completely different ballgame, and you'd have to have consumed a lot more over that period of time. Okay, so that's a nice way of doing it. I generally do weigh myself before different training sessions, different temperatures here or there, and try and get an idea of like what works for me from a hydration perspective. Okay. Right. So practical applications, just as an example. This is hour, second hour, third hour, fourth hour. Very rarely do people go just from 4 hours. But what I do is when it comes to my energy bottle, I actually work out, or sometimes I actually use a barbell soft pouch. I work out how long I'm going to be swimming for. I put in the amount of carbohydrates into that squeeze pack that I need, and that's like my dispensing bottle, or it could be in a bottle, how many scoops of powder I put in, so that I know that if I'm going for an hour, I want 60 grams an hour, or I'm going for a very easy workout, so I'll go 30 grams for an hour. And I will work out over that period of time, how many carbohydrates I need, and I'll just sip in between to make sure that I deplete exactly what I need to give me my energy requirement. When it comes to the hydration bottle, generally I just put a bottle there and I do drink from it, on a regular basis, also in between. So if I have the energy bottle on the one side, I'll definitely sip from the hypertonic solution on the other side. The other option is you can combine them. But the difficult thing about combining them is now you're actually a little bit skewed as to what hydration is and what energy is. If it's an isotonic solution, you can have that, but you might have to have 2 bottles there at the pool, and you might have to finish the 1 bottle in the 1 hour, and then maybe half a bottle for every other half an hour that you're going to be training, and finish that as well. And I think it's important to understand that you do need to measure this. It's not a guessing game. The more accurate you are, the better you can support your energy levels. I'll teach you something that's quite amazing, is that people say the carbohydrates really make a big difference in performance, and the answer is absolutely they do. There's a famous test called the Mountains test, which was done quite a number of years ago. There they use cyclists, but it works for any sports discipline. They took 2 groups of elite cyclists and they split them. So like maybe 30, and it was 15 and 15. They told the one group of cyclists so basically they did a warm up, and then they went into an all-out time trial. And they told the one group, you drink water, you drink an energy drink. The one that drank the carbohydrate energy drink, they all finished much faster than the other 15 that drank water. Why? Because the carbohydrates improved the ability to perform. But then they did a Mountains test, and what they did was they made the right group swallow the carbohydrate mix, and they made the left group drink the carbohydrate, swirl it around in their mouth, and then spit it out without swallowing. Both groups performed at the same rate. The minute the carbohydrate touches your tongue, it has a neurological trigger. It triggers this response, and it actually triggers the ability to perform. Obviously, as it goes longer, the body's going to say, hey, you tricked me. I'm going to make you suffer now. So yes, for short efforts or efforts where you want to do sort of a faster training but still want to get the performance benefit, you can utilize that trick. But over longer periods of time, I would advise definitely you need to ingest the carbohydrate. Okay. Let's talk about protein fueling. A lot of people do have protein shakes sitting, or carbohydrate mixed protein shakes sitting on the side of a pool when they're doing a session or doing some exercise session. Can protein be utilized as a fuel source? It can be utilized as a fuel source. Is it a efficient fuel source? No, it's not, because protein can only be broken down at rates of about 12 grams per an hour at the most. The digestive system has to work very hard to break down protein. So if you're doing a very long session, there's a process called gluconeogenesis that comes into place, and your body's using carbs, it's burning off fat, and then the brain will break down or cannibalize your own muscle protein. So let's convert this to a fuel substrate and use this as energy as well. But that's usually 3 to 4 hours, and most sessions are not going to be that long. So protein, I'd say at a gala, because it's extending many, many hours, would be absolutely vital to take from a recovery perspective. But during an actual training session, yes, you can utilize it, but I would say in very, very small amounts, predominantly utilizing carbohydrates. But if it's quite a long session, the protein will help stabilize blood sugar, keep the hunger at bay, and will provide some sort of stability. So when I'm exercising, I actually use a carbohydrate gel or a drink mix, and it is actually it's a 75-gram mix, but it's 67 grams of carbs and 8 grams of protein. A very small amount of protein, which in an hour would definitely be absorbed and broken down. And I find that that works best for me. And it does work very, very well. Okay. If it's multi-day swimming, like a gala is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, or you get these camps or these weeks where they do these killer weeks, etc., then obviously protein becomes very important. And I'm going to talk about it more from a dietary perspective on a daily basis. Okay. I'm going to go into a little bit more now on daily dieting. Is there anybody that wants to know anything on the fueling side? If there are any questions there, you can also always just pop them in the chat if you want. Okay. All right. I'm going to continue. So let's understand on a day-to-day basis, because I think this is also one of the biggest headaches and misconceptions when it comes to exercise, is that very, very often an athlete will not understand that the human body burns off a certain amount of calories in a day at rest. We call that rest metabolic rate, and I've actually put it down. RMR or BMR, if you want to call it, which is your base or basal metabolic rate. These things are the kind of energy expenditures done at rest. What are energy expenditures done at rest? We call it NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Digestive function, bodily function, the brain functioning. Your body burns off calories on a daily basis, and it expends thermogenesis, so it expends heat, it burns off calories. Now, I know that my rest metabolic rate is around 1,680 calories per day. If I'm doing no exercise, that's how much I burn off. The more lean muscle you've got, the higher your rest metabolic rate. The lower your lean muscle to body fat, the lower. So for some people, I actually went for a body composition test when I was overseas. They put me on this very fancy scanner, like nearly $1 million scanner, and they did this whole infrared scanning, and they said to me, your RMR is 1,500. And I said, it's not, it's 1,680. And the dietitian argued with me, and I said to the dietitian, let me explain to you why. I said, based on lean muscle and based on my diet, because I know that my diet also helps elevate. Because remember, I said the digestive system works to break down food. Certain foods it has to work harder, like protein, have a much higher protein diet. So my body has got a higher metabolic rate in order to break down protein. But the next thing you need to look at is your training session burn rate. So now you go swim 2 hours, okay? And you could burn off 1,000 calories to 1,200 calories. Let's say you burn off 600 calories now. It's 1,200 calories. So if I'm burning off 1,680 at rest, and then I'm burning 1,200 with exercise, the total calories that I've burnt off during the day is actually 2,880 in total, just under 3,000 calories. The question I always ask athletes is, how much are you eating in a day? And somebody said, no, like I can't really eat much. Just 8 here or there. I work it out and I see like, wow, you're in a calorie deficit of 1,000. You cannot do that because you're not giving your body the ability to have the right amount of nutrients to be able to recover from those sessions, to be able to get stronger as an athlete. You're also putting your immune system at risk, and you also have a risk of injury. And tendon injuries and flare-ups, etc., are sometimes very often not overtraining, but they're also overuse with insufficient macronutrient and caloric intake. There's something that we call RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome, and RED-S is very often seen mainly actually in female athletes that are worried about body composition and about eating, and they need to fit the part to play the role, and very often peer pressure. That should never be a worry because the health of the individual is way more important, and food is the best way to recover and to support the energy system and to be able to support the immune system and to make sure that the body gets what it requires on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of people say to me, so I look at unique daily burn rate, basically what I'm burning off, and every day is different because yesterday I trained once, burnt up 800 calories in my session, added to my, let's call it 1600, is 2,400 calories. I actually want to maintain lean muscle and I want to stay lean and increase lean muscle, stay lean. So I eat in about a 300 calorie deficit. So I'll eat 2,100 if I burnt up 2,400. But today I trained twice. I burnt up 800 calories in the morning and 200 calories in the evening. So it's 1,000 calories today. So the more you train, the more you must eat. The less you train, the less you can eat. And that's how it works. And that's why I call it a unique burn rate. So if I look at a rest day, you'll see, and this is just broken down, you'll see protein is 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. I'm going to stick with that column there. Let's have a look. Single training day, protein is 1.4 to 2 grams, and then double training day. Protein's a target. Every single individual, if you're an athlete, you need to hit that target every single day. Based on what you're trying to achieve from a recovery perspective, from increasing lean muscle, etc., your protein intake is a constant. It's a target. Think of a bullseye with rings around it, and that's your plate. You want to hit that bullseye every single day. The bullseye is the protein. The rings around it are your carbs, your fats, etc., the other parts of the meal. Every single meal you make, you need to revolve it around the protein. I eat around 200 grams of protein a day. In chicken breast terms, it's like 7 chicken breasts equivalent of protein a day. I need to start making sure that in the morning, I eat 40 grams in the morning, maybe 20 grams snack, 30 grams at lunch, 20 grams snack, maybe 30 grams at dinner, 20 grams before bed, sometimes 30. And I spread that protein over the day to make sure that I hit my target every single day, because that's the key. I damage muscle fiber, I need to repair muscle fiber. If I don't take in enough protein, I don't recover properly. I cannot adapt, I cannot become better as an athlete. And I compromise immune system as well and put my body at risk for injury. Okay. But you'll see on a rest day, carbs are low. Remember I said, like when you're doing low intensity or rest day, you can carbohydrate intake can be lower. Single training day picks up. Double training day picks up even more. The more you train, the harder you train, the more carbs you can have. And then you'll notice fat intake. Fat for US dietary guidelines sits between 15 and 35%. US dietary guidelines like it to be at 35%. Sports nutrition guidelines are between 15 and 35%. My nutrition and the updated and other guidelines are between 15 to 30% fat, and that is the total percentage of fat in caloric intake. So I prefer on days where the carbs are up, the fat is down, and on days where the carbs are down, the fat can be a little bit up in order to maintain balance and also to keep me full and satiated so that I'm not starving. Okay. So let's have a look at how unique burn rate works. I've just taken here a person who's 45 years old, weight 65, does endurance and strength. So, you could say a swimmer and a strength athlete, burns off 1,633 calories at rest. One day does an easy training session, 60 minutes, burns off 600 calories. So 1,633 plus 600 will give me 2,233. That's what he burns off there. Another day he does interval training, quality sets. Here he burns off 1,100 calories. And there you'll see 1633, 27. So that's a big difference between 2,233 on one day to 2,733 another day. You need to make sure that you understand that you train more, you can eat more. You train less, you can eat less. And it's like shifts and shapes around our training every single day. This is just a breakdown of an example as how a meal can be structured to get this kind of calorie intake. And this is just something that I did. So you'll see here, in this case, the protein intake was 111 grams, which is on target for 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for this person. Fat 21%, which was perfect, and then carbs around 261. This is a little bit more technical, but this will give you an idea. So a lot of people ask me about intermittent fasting. Definitely for kids, a big no-no. For adults, depends what your goal is. But if you're an athlete, a big no-no. Because the minute you train in the morning and you fast, if it's a 16-hour, 8-hour window, you've actually stopped yourself from recovering and you've actually mitigated that recovery process. And I'll talk a bit about that now. So if we're talking about muscle recovery, there's two things that the muscle requires. The one is glycogen replenishment. I did mention that most of the carbohydrate stores in the form of glycogen are stored in the muscles, some in the liver, but mainly in the muscle. And then the other thing we look at is muscle protein synthesis. So you damage muscle fiber, you need to resynthesize that muscle fiber. So muscle protein synthesis is a process where protein is produced to repair damaged muscle. Protein is broken down to amino acids. These are pooled, and then they're used to repair muscle fiber. Okay, how does protein synthesis take place? Quite simple. It will only take place if you allow the muscles to repair. So a lot of people say to me, I take protein during exercise and my muscles can recover during exercise. That does not work. While you're exercising, your body cannot recover. Okay. If you are overtraining, if you're in OTS, overtraining syndrome, you cannot build muscle either. You cannot allow it to recover. Your muscle's constantly being broken down, and it's broken down. So that's another thing. Okay. How do you know if you are, okay, there's a nice term. Let me put it this way. I don't know if you've all heard the term anabolic, but anabolic is a building up or constructive phase. So catabolic is a breaking down or a destructive phase of the body. How do you know if the human body is in an anabolic or a catabolic state? We run a gas test. We can see how much nitrogen gas is being excreted by kidneys. Okay. If the nitrogen is in a nitrogen positive balance, it means that you're in an anabolic state. If you're in a nitrogen negative balance, you're in a catabolic state. What produces nitrogen in the human body? Protein. If you do not eat enough protein, you're in a catabolic state. If you eat enough protein, you're putting yourself into an anabolic state. And that's why protein is so important. Okay, so you need to be in a positive nitrogen balance. If you're in a negative nitrogen balance, growth will not occur. Very important to understand. If you fast and you do not eat, you're in a negative nitrogen balance. You're not consuming protein, growth will not occur. You're delaying the onset of recovery. Amino acids are absolutely vital for muscle protein synthesis, and this is made available only by consuming protein. Okay, I'm going to take it a little bit further. What triggers or stimulates muscle protein synthesis? Leucine is the main trigger. Okay, so leucine, if any of you have heard of BCAAs or branched chain amino acids, they consist of leucine, isoleucine, and valine. But leucine is the big one. In order to trigger muscle protein synthesis, we want to hit what's called a leucine trigger. It starts at 2.5 grams, but I'd say 3 grams is where you perfectly hit the leucine trigger. So if you want to get 3 grams of leucine into your body, you would need to consume over 30 grams of protein. If it's a really high quality protein, like egg whites, chicken breast, that would give you 3 grams. If it's a plant protein, you might need to go to 40 grams to get a leucine trigger. But that's why it's important. So post-exercise is to take in a higher protein amount to trigger the leucine trigger and allow for muscle protein synthesis to take place to start that recovery process. Because we're not normal human beings. I train today, I'm training tomorrow, I'm training the next day. Recovery, recovery, recovery. And you will only be as strong or as good as you recover from a session. If you cannot recover from the session, then you might as well not have done that session. Recovery is the key to recovery. Okay. I see that the designer didn't add one of the slides in. I'm going to summarize here, and I want to talk a little bit about caffeine and some other beneficial stuff. Okay. Nutrition is unique to an individual. I think it's important. When I say know your current health status or performance demands, so as a blood chemistry expert or preventative health specialist, I work with a lot of physicians. I do advocate blood testing. If there's a child even, and I do work with children that are very talented athletes. Some of them are teenagers, 16 upwards. But I always advocate to run blood tests to see, is there a deficiency? Very recently, I had an 18-year-old who had extremely low magnesium. There was a slump constantly. A top tennis player, actually. And the red cell magnesium was very low. So we had to dose of magnesium to give her the benefit. I've had athletes that have had potassium issues. I've had athletes that have had iron issues, low hemoglobin. Sometimes there's markers that allow you to see a baseline and to see if they improve. So you should know your health status. And the reason I say that is because we put our bodies under stress. If you want to be a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and you put your foot down on the gas and there is a weak pipe, the last thing you want is for that pipe to burst. Health is wealth. Never take it for granted. And if you're a couch potato and you're not putting stress on your pipes, great. But you're not a couch potato, so you're putting stress on your pipes. You want to make sure, listen, I'm in good health and it can withstand the stresses. And are there ways to improve my performance in a natural way from a nutrition perspective? Then do it. Okay. Endurance athletes always nutrition is based on time and intensity. And that's what I said. Like, depending on how long you are performing for and the intensity you're performing at, that will determine what you should be consuming. And then you also need to understand what your daily calorie intake and requirements are every single day. Nutrition needs to mirror these requirements. They're two puzzle pieces that fit together. You're training on the one end, but the nutrition needs to fit in on the other end. Keep it clean and healthy. So, I mean, obviously whole foods and unprocessed foods are the best way to go. I understand people like their treats here or there, but the cleaner you keep it, the better you'll be able to perform, the better you'll be able to recover. So always become an expert at understanding what goes into your mouth. So when I say that, I also mean if there's a food that impacts you negatively, eliminate it. If there's a food that impacts you positively, keep it. Process of elimination. Eat what's good for you. Don't eat what's not good for you, or keep it very toned down. Because you know that you're going to suffer if you eat the one more than the other, especially if it does impact you from a health perspective. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to put up my details here. If there is anybody that wants to ask me questions, maybe you didn't think of it now, and there's a question in the chat, I'm going to come to it now. But if you do want to ever ask questions, you can send to coach@32gr.com. Let me talk about a few added benefits of some of the supplements. Some people ask me, what supplements are beneficial from an endurance or power pace perspective? The number one on my list is creatine monohydrate. Creatine monohydrate, 5 grams a day, especially for an endurance athlete, whether you're a swimmer, a cyclist, a runner, it doesn't matter. It will absolutely give you a huge benefit from a power and a performance perspective. And I can promise you now that if you take that consistently and you don't have to cycle on and off, you can take it forever. You won't put on weight. Yes, it does cause a little bit of water retention, but 5 grams won't cause water retention. But over time, and swimmers do dry land work, a lot of athletes do strength work, it will give you more strength and more power over time. Absolutely an amazing benefit. If you're not taking creatine monohydrate, start taking it. Does it impact your kidney? No, it does not at all. So absolutely brilliant, very safe and completely natural. And there's no issues as far as weight controls go, etc. Other kinds of supplements. Caffeine. Caffeine, if you can tolerate it, assuming it doesn't cause gastrointestinal distress, etc. Caffeine has a massive benefit to lower the rate of perceived effort. We call it RPE, and allow you to perform better. It gives you mental focus and clarity. Disadvantage, caffeine can keep you awake at night and disturb your sleeping pattern. So if somebody's doing a morning session, I advocate consuming caffeine. Evening sessions, especially if you're a child, not a good idea. I also don't advocate caffeine to anybody under the age of 50. I think 14-year-olds and younger, I wouldn't advocate caffeine intake. 15 upwards, I think it's absolutely fine. The cutoff for caffeine is around 400 milligrams a day, but I think just 60 milligrams of caffeine, which is basically like a strong espresso or like a 1.5 cups of coffee, is absolutely sufficient to give you a nice amount of stimulation from that perspective. Okay. Other things that can help from a pace and power point of view, things like beta-alanine, but that you'd have to cycle on for 8 weeks and then you cycle off. The only problem with beta-alanine is you have to take it consistently every single day, even if you're not training. You're taking 3,800 milligrams a day or 3.8 grams. It can cause a symptom called paresthesia, where you get this prickling or tingling sensation under the skin. I've had clients that said to me, oh my God, I was allergic. I took Allergex and it didn't help. Allergex is not an allergy. It produces a substance called carnosine, and the carnosine acts as acts as a buffer. So if there's two athletes performing, let's say you're doing a 100-meter sprint or maxing out in 100 meters in a full, You're both exactly the same person. The one who cycled on beta-alanine, okay, he will not lose that acceleration. He will actually have that extra 1,000 revs towards them. The one guy will be pushing 6,000, the other guy will boom 7,000. You have a very fast finish. So that's the difference beta-alanine can make over an 8-week cycle. It is beneficial. I find it does work quite well. Another thing, citrulline malate can also help. It acts as a vasodilator. It helps transport as well oxygen around the body. These are very healthy and safe. Citrulline malate is best taken consistently for 7 days, 7 grams a day. On day 7 or 8, if that's your competition, boom, it will make a big difference. Absolutely top end speed or power. That's where you'll find that citrulline malate would be an advantage. Okay, so those are just a few that I wanted to mention. And then obviously, you know, from a supplement point of view, I think protein is a supplement, if you're especially eating a high protein diet like myself. There's no ways I can eat 7 chicken breasts a day. I even battle to eat 3 a day. So obviously I utilize supplements as a source of increasing my protein intake, and most athletes do, because it's just a much more convenient source. Okay. Let me just have a look at the questions. 3-kilometer cold swim next month, 12 degrees. Must feel slightly more or keep things the same as normal. So look, 3-kilometer cold swim is still 3 kilometers, even if it's in open water. And I'm sure you're not wearing a wetsuit because open water swimmers love these extreme temps. So Gareth, I would suggest still fueling, because 3 kilometers is a long swim. And first of all, you don't know what the currents are going to be like on the day. The body does adapt to that temperature over time. And then eventually you're actually pushing at a pace which is still going to be burning up. Your body does burn up calories to stay warm, by the way, not just to stay cold. So if you're in cold water, your body's still going to generate heat to keep you warm. It's natural. Your body's in a protection mode. It's the same as when you're sitting in a sauna and you're sweating, your body's trying to keep you cool. You're burning off calories as well. So it works on both extremes. You are burning off more calories. You do need to actually consume carbohydrates. I would take in a pre-race meal before the swim. I don't know if you ever have seconding or boats en route. You could top up. I don't know how fast you swim, but you could top up every 30 minutes with rolling your back, taking a gel or taking a bottle, etc. And that will work quite well. You will notice that if you do take some form of energy during the session, I think you'll notice a difference in your ability to hold a stronger or faster pace over a longer period of time. So if it is a time-based swim, I would say definitely fuel the session. If it's just a training swim, I would say definitely take something pre-exercise. Swim the 3Ks and make sure you recover afterwards. I hope that helped. Somebody just asked from a consultation perspective, just drop me a mail. You can drop me a mail there, coach@32gr.com, and let me know what you need. Is creatine okay for teenagers? Yes, it is. It is. I would say that also a 14 or 15-year-old upwards, I would say would be okay. Younger than that, not necessary. Also, I would prefer to also understand the kind of training that they're doing. Creatine is much better for somebody that's doing a lot of dry land and strength work. And if they are, then it would play a much bigger benefit. If they're just new to the sport and they are still getting into swimming technique and still learning the ropes, then I would say you shouldn't really bother with the supplements, rather focus on the basics and the foundation. Remember, supplements only help somebody that's already got those other elements taken care of. We use it to give people percentage advantages. If there's a difference between, man, he's swimming a 56-second 100-meter or a 57-second 100-meter, can it help drop the second? Possibly could. Then I would say supplement, but it really depends on the level of athlete. Look, with 32 GR gels, there's 2 types. There's the Race Pro gel, which is a resealable, and then there's the Snap gels. Again, it's a volume of carbohydrates, like with any kind of sports nutrition product, that you would take in for an hour. So if you're going to consume, those gels are 22 grams of carbs. If somebody's looking at 30 or 40 grams of carbs per hour, then you would take like one every 30 minutes. If you wanted to get to 60 grams of carbs now with a normal snapshot, you need to take one every 22 minutes, I say. So that's how you would utilize it. Yeah, for swimming under 15, yes, absolutely. Carbohydrates are, gel is a carbohydrate. A banana is a carbohydrate, potato is a carbohydrate, but a gel is in and out quite quickly. It gets converted into glucose, and absolutely, a swimmer that is 12, 13, 14, 15, they need carbs when they swim. They absolutely do need carbs. Obviously, if somebody's a type 1 or type 2 diabetic, and sometimes it's genetic, then we'd look at it differently and we'd see, okay, what level of glucose intake would be suitable during exercise and at what intensity to make sure that they have the ability to help with the uptake of that glucose. In some cases, people are insulin dependent, but if a teenager is healthy, hit them with the carbs regardless. Definitely, don't hold back. As a small breakfast, okay, I think it depends on what kind of exercise you're going to be doing. If it's strength, I would focus on protein intake with a little bit of carb. If it's endurance, I'd focus on a higher portion of carbohydrate to a lower portion of protein. Kinds of meals. Okay, I mentioned we've got a product called pre-race meal, which is brilliant. You can add it in hot or cold, make a little porridge, add a bit of honey, peanut butter if you want. Eat it off a spoon, or you can even just have it as a shake. You could also just take an energy bar. You could take a banana. You could just have a tiny little bit of, sometimes for athletes, actually give an idea of overnight soaked oats so that they don't have to do any prep work in the morning. And then somebody said to me, I don't like it cold. So add hot water to it, make it warm. Sometimes I use pre-cooked white rice meal. You could have just anything that's simple and easy. If you can't eat, then have a shake. If you can eat, try it. Sometimes it's nice. But those are some small ideas. I actually, on our 32GR website, there's a little artificial intelligence bot. It's called Wolff bot, or it's an AI bot. You can actually ask it a question like, can you give me a recipe for a pre-race meal? Can you give me a recipe for a post-exercise recovery? I've even got protein pancake recipes in there. It will give you those recipes, and you can ask about that. Okay, that's it. I actually see there are quite a few open water swimmers. I saw Craig just jumped off. He's one of the crazies. But if there's any other questions, then feel free to ask. I do sort of respond on a first in, first out basis. We're heading towards Comrades Marathon at the moment, so I've been inundated with Comrades requests, but I get to the emails as soon as possible. Just drop me an email and I will respond as soon as possible. So I hope this session was beneficial for you. I'm sure it's a lot to take in. I try to keep it as short and as simple as possible, because they can get really complicated and really in depth. And there's a lot of science behind nutrition, sports nutrition, and even training principles. And we really I try to cover as much as possible, but to try and keep it as focused as possible as well. So thank you very much for joining me. I wish you all a blessed week. Keep healthy, keep safe, and we'll chat again soon. And we will send this out, the recording as well as the presentation, once the marketing managers manage to get it off the cloud. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording here, and we will chat again soon.